Chapter 16 of Under Boy Scout Colors by Joseph Bushnell Ames. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16 Trexler's Transformation. Sanson's account of his visit to Paul Trexler was received at first with a good deal of incredulity, but when he persisted that he wasn't trying to play any trick, general curiosity was aroused among the fellows, and they began to drop in at the Trexler house to see for themselves the wonderful case of birds and the even more wonderful photographs. Before he knew it, Paul became almost a public character. At first he did not like it at all. Excessively shy by nature, he had gone his solitary way for so long that he didn't know how to take the jokes and banter and mild horseplay of a crowd of boys. But gradually he grew accustomed to it, and when he found that the fellows weren't making fun of him, as he at first supposed, but really regarded him with a marked respect for his unusual talents, he began actually to enjoy the situation. He came to know the boys better, to find pleasure in their companionship. He no longer went off on those solitary tramps, for there was always someone ready and eager to accompany him, and little by little even these excursions began to grow slightly less frequent as he discovered with a mild surprise that there was a good deal of fun to be extracted from the regular sports and games and doings of the crowd. Frank Sanson was mainly responsible for this. Keen, eager, full of enthusiasm about everything, he flung himself into all the school and troop activities with a zest which made him one of the liveliest boys in Hillsgrove. He could enjoy an occasional tramp in the woods with Trexler because of the novelty and interest of their search, but he could not understand anyone wanting to devote himself exclusively to such an occupation. "You miss half your life in not going more with the fellows, Paul," he remarked one day in early April. "Why don't you leave the old camera at home and come on up to the ball field with me? We're going to have a great old practice today." "But I can't play baseball," protested Trexler. "Shucks! How do you know? Did you ever try?" "No, but " "It's time you started in, then," interrupted Sanson. "Of course you can't expect to make the team this year, but you'll have a lot of fun playing with the scrub. Hustle up or we'll be late." So Trexler went, mainly because he didn't exactly know how to refuse the boy he had come to like so much. But it was with a good deal of inward trepidation that he trailed after Frank to where Ranny Phelps, who captained the team, was chatting with Mr. Curtis's younger brother, just home for the Easter holidays. He had a feeling that he was going to make an awful exhibition of himself, and that conviction was not lessened by the slight lifting of the eyebrows with which Ranny greeted Frank's request that his friend be allowed to practice with the others. But out in the field, nervously adjusting a borrowed glove, Paul was conscious of an odd, tingling sensation altogether different from apprehension. The day was typically April and fairly breathed of spring. Birds darted hither and thither, singing joyously. Beyond the low stone wall, at one side the feathery outlines of a wild cherry, pale green, with touches of white blossoms just bursting into bloom, was etched against the sky in delicate tracery. Farther still, a man was plowing, and from the long straight furrows came that moist, fresh, homely smell of newly turned earth that one gets only in springtime. Out of the deep blue sky, flecked with fluffy, idly drifting clouds, the sun shone warm and caressing. From all about came the sound of quick, clear, eager voices, to which was presently added the crack of leather meeting wood, the thud of feet drumming the turf, and the duller sound of leather pounding against leather. There was something about it all that stirred the boy and sent the blood running like quicksilver through his veins. yet which made him feel curiously alone and out of it. Other springs had meant to him the beautiful awakening of nature, the return of the birds he loved, the charm of wood and stream and open countryside at its best. But somehow that failed to satisfy him as it had in the past. Vaguely he felt that something was missing. He could not say just what. A feeling of emulation stirred him, a desire to take his part in the clash and struggle and ceaseless competition from which, till now, he had held aloof. Admiringly, with a faint touch of envy, he watched Frank Sanson make a difficult one-hand stop with seeming ease. Why hadn't he come out before and learned the game and how to uphold his end with the others? Was it too late even now, he wondered? "Hi, Paul! Get under this one!" The shout from Sanson roused Trexler to the realization that a fly was coming in his direction. He ran back a little, then forward. The ball seemed to be dropping with the speed of a cannon shot, but he forced himself to meet it without shrinking. Thrusting up his hands awkwardly, he staggered a bit under its momentum as he caught at it, and a burning sting tingled in the bare palm which had taken most of the impact. The ball, bouncing off, rolled to one side, and a laugh went round the field as he chased after it and threw it in. When he returned to his place, Paul's face was crimson, but his lips were set in a stubborn line, and he scarcely noticed the pain in his hand. "I will get the hang of it," he muttered under his breath. "I'll learn to do it right if it takes all season." He stuck to his position as long as any of the others, and on the way home, with some embarrassment, he spoke to Frank of his determination. The latter was delighted and offered to help him in any way he could. As a result, from that time forth, the two rarely went anywhere without a baseball. Whenever there were a few minutes to spare, they used them for throwing and catching. On the field, before and after the regular work, Frank knocked out flies or grounders, and in many other ways did his best to give his friend as much as possible of the practice he needed. A baseball player isn't easily made to order. The normal boy seems almost to absorb his knowledge of the game through the pores of his skin, gaining proficiency by constant, never-ending practice that usually begins as soon as he is big enough to throw a ball. But much can be done by dogged persistence, and Paul Trexler had that quality to a marked degree. As the days passed, dust began to gather on his camera and on the cover of his book of bird photographs. In this new and strenuous occupation he found little time for the things which had formerly absorbed him. He regretted the many long tramps he had planned, but somehow he failed to miss them as much as he expected. Each noticeable improvement in his game filled him with a deep, abiding satisfaction, surpassing even the delight which he used to feel on securing a fine photograph. The climax came that afternoon when he was allowed to play on the scrub in place of one of the fielders who had not shown up. Not only did he fail to make any mirth-provoking blunders, but he even put through one play that brought forth a surprised, approving comment from Ranny Phelps himself. "I don't know what you've been doing to him, Frank," the latter said to Sanson, who passed on the remark afterward. "I've never seen anybody improve the way he has. That catch wasn't anything wonderful, of course, but when he threw to third he used his head, which is more than a lot of fellows right here on the field ever think of doing." The latter part of the speech, especially, was typical of the handsome Ranny. He ran the ball team as he did a good many other things, reaching decisions more often through impulse and prejudice than from a mature judgment. There could be no question of his knowledge of the game or his ability as a pitcher. The latter was really extraordinary for a fellow of his age and experience, and this, perhaps, was what made him so intolerant of less gifted players. At all events, he had a little trick of sarcasm which did not endear him to those on whom it was exercised. Most fellows take the ordinary sort of calling down, especially if it has been earned, with a fair amount of grace, but it rarely does any good to rub it in, as Ranny so often did. You'd think he was a little tin god on wheels, the way he struts up and down, digging into the fellows in that uppish, sneering way, Court Parker heatedly remarked one late afternoon in the season. You might think he never made any errors himself. I don't suppose he really means anything by it, returned Dale Tompkins, rather deprecatingly. For some time that day he had been watching Phelps and wondering rather wistfully whether Ranny was ever going to entirely forget that impulsive flare-up of his so many months ago. For a long time, to be sure, there had been few signs of active animosity from the blond chap. It would be well nigh impossible for any boy to long maintain that excessive coldness toward a fellow with whom he was so often and so intimately thrown. Especially since the beginning of baseball practice, there had been a good deal of intercourse between them, but always Dale was conscious of a deep reserve looming up between them like some invisible, insurmountable barrier, and there were times when he would have given the world to break that barrier down. Parker sniffed. Then why does he do it? It only gets the fellows raw without it doing a scrap of good. You're a great one to stand up for him, Tommy. He's treated you mean as dirt. Didn't he promise to let you pitch in some of the games? Why, no, it wasn't exactly a promise. It was the same thing. He made you think he was going to put you in, and all spring you've worked your arm nearly off, pitching to the bunch. Then when a regular game came along, he stepped into the box himself and hogged the whole thing, 9 innings. It's been the same ever since, except last week when you went in for one miserable inning after we'd won the game. I call that an insult. It looked as if he thought you weren't any good." Dale shrugged his shoulders. "Maybe he does," he returned quietly. "He's a lot better pitcher than I am." "Is he? Humph! He's nowhere near as steady, let me tell you. Wait till he gets up against a real team, and I shouldn't wonder a bit if he blew up. He did last year, and we mighty near lost the series. He can't stand being joshed, and Troop One is just the bunch to do it." Dale laughed a little and set down his companion's disparaging remarks to temper rather than to any real belief in what he was saying. He had never seen Ranny pitch before this season, but he could not imagine him losing his superb control and blowing up. He would have given anything for a chance to pitch against Troop One, but he had long ago given up hoping. Ranny made it only too clear that he meant to keep that honor for himself, just as he monopolized the pitching at all the other games. Dale couldn't make up his mind whether this was from a deliberate desire to shut him out or because the team captain really lacked faith in his ability and was afraid to trust him. Feeling as he did toward the other, liking, admiring him still, almost in spite of himself, Tompkins rather hoped it was the latter case. In either event, however, he was obliged to content himself with the cold comfort that with Ranleigh Phelps pitching his best, Troop 5 was practically certain to win. The intertroop baseball series had been arranged so that the two strongest teams were matched together on the concluding day. Both had won every game they played so far, and the result this Saturday afternoon would decide the championship. Naturally, there was a big crowd of spectators. Practically every boy in town was present, ready to root for his favorite team, and the grandstand was well filled with older enthusiasts. When Troop 5 won the toss and spread out on the field, Dale Tompkins, with a faint sigh, dropped down on the bench he had ornamented for most of the season. Watching Ranny Phelps walking out to the mound, a wave of envy, pure and simple, swept over him. He wanted to pitch desperately. At that moment he would have welcomed almost any contingency. even the unthinkable blowing up that Court had predicted. That would give him his chance. He had done practically nothing all the season, and it seemed unfair that the last game should come without giving him a single opportunity of showing his mettle. What's the use of trying at all if you never get a show? He thought disconsolately. But the mood did not last long. Dale was too keen a baseball fan not to become swiftly absorbed in the game, which meant so much to himself and his brother scouts. There could be no question of Ranny's fine form. For the first 5 innings not a hit was scored against him. To be sure, several players made first on various errors, but none got beyond third, and in the meantime Troop 5 had scored 2 runs. "He's certainly some pitcher," Tompkins remarked rather wistfully to Paul Trexler, who had taken a seat beside him. "Looks as if we had the game cinched." "I hope so, if only he don't blow up." "Blow up?" interrupted Tompkins sharply. "Does he act like it? You've been listening to Court Parker's rubbish, Paul. I never seen any fellow pitch a steadier game." But though he had been swift to deny the possibility, Trexler's remark lingered in Dale's mind, and almost unconsciously he began to watch for signs which might confirm it. The fellows that composed the rival team were rather older than the average scout, and of a certain rough and ready type which made their joshing apt to carry more sting than that sort of thing usually does. So far, however, there had been little in the pitcher's manner or behavior for them to take hold of, and the stream of commonplace chatter and joking seemed to affect Ranny as little as water does a duck. He took it carelessly, with now and then an apt retort which turned the laugh against the other fellows, and throughout the 6th and 7th innings his work continued to show much of the smooth perfection it had displayed from the first. It was in the beginning of the 8th that Tompkins' face began to grow a little troubled. Ranny had several rather noticeable mannerisms, which were especially apt to appear on the flood tide of success. Whether deliberately or not, he had hitherto suppressed them, but now he seemed momentarily to relax his vigilance. He had struck out the first batter, and as the second stepped up to face him, the pitcher paused, swept the grandstand with a leisurely glance, and then tossed back his head in an odd, rather affected gesture before starting to wind up. The gesture had probably originated on the gridiron, where hair is worn rather long and is apt to trail into one's eyes. Here it looked a bit foolish, and instantly one of the opposition, who was coaching at first base, a red-headed fellow named Connors, seized upon it. "See him shake his mane, fellows!" he yelled in a shrill falsetto. "Don't let him scare you, Blakey. He's tame." "He'll be the goat, all right, before we get done with him," chimed in another. Ranny hesitated an instant in his swing, bit his lips, and then put the ball over. It was wide, and as he caught the return, there was an angry flush on his handsome face. "Don't he blush sweetly?" shrilled Connors, dancing about off first. "He'd make a peach of a girl." Ranny wound up hastily and pitched again. It was a straight, speedy ball, but in his annoyance he must have forgotten that this was just the sort Blake liked. The latter met it squarely with a clean crack that brought Dale's heart into his mouth and jerked him to his feet to watch with tight lips and despairing eyes the soaring flight of the white sphere over the diamond and on, seemingly to the very limits of the outfield. Chapter 17